The market on Keltar 9 was never quiet. Not with its screaming vendors, clashing species, and the constant hum of greed that clung to the air thicker than smoke. But the moment the human girl knelt down and placed 3 credits into a rusted cage lock, something shifted that no one noticed until it was too late. Her name was Mira. She was small even for a human child, barefoot, hair tied with a fraying ribbon, clothes patched more times than they were sewn, and she had wandered into the outer ring of the market chasing the smell of fried grain, not knowing she had stepped into the most dangerous aisle on the planet. The livestock strip, where creatures too weak, too broken, or too hated to be sold properly were left to die slowly for entertainment. The dragon lay inside the cage like a discarded myth, its once massive frame reduced to skin stretched over bone, scales cracked and dull, one wing twisted at an angle that made seasoned traders wince. A control collar burned deep into its neck to suppress flame and will alike, and a hand-painted sign hung crookedly above it reading, "Dying cheap, NO returns." Vendors laughed as customers passed, some throwing scraps, some throwing insults, because dragons were monsters to most of the galaxy, and dead ones were safer than living ones. Mira stopped anyway. She stared for a long time, her small fingers curling around the bars as the dragon's eye, clouded, exhausted, ancient beyond reason, flickered open just enough to see her. It did not snarl. It did not threaten. It simply waited because it had already learned what hope cost. "Why is it shaking?" Mira asked the vendor, a thick-skinned Grull merchant with more scars than teeth. He snorted. "Because it's dying. 3 credits if you want to watch it up close. 5 if you want it dragged away early." Mira reached into her pocket and pulled out everything she owned in the universe. 3 scratched credits, warm from her palm. "I want it," she said. Laughter rippled through the aisle. "You can't afford a dragon," the merchant said. "I don't want a dragon," Mira replied quietly. "I want him." She dropped the credits into the lock slot. The cage opened with a tired mechanical click. That was when the market began to go silent. Not all at once, but in waves, as if reality itself was pausing to catch its breath. The dragon's eye widened, pupils narrowing in disbelief as the suppression collar flickered, its systems confused by an unauthorized release. Mira stepped into the cage without hesitation, ignoring the heat radiating from broken scales, ignoring the gasps around her, and knelt beside the dragon's massive head. "It's okay," she whispered, as if soothing a frightened animal instead of a being that once leveled cities. "I didn't buy you to die." She tore a piece of bread from her pocket and held it to his mouth, hands shaking but resolute, and the dragon, against every instinct, against centuries of pain, accepted it because kindness spoken softly is louder than chains. Around them, traders froze as sensors began to scream warnings, ancient draconic signatures flaring where there should have been none, and far above the market dome, something vast and furious shifted its attention toward Keltar 9. The Grull merchant backed away slowly, fear finally replacing mockery. "What did you do?" he whispered. Mira looked up, confused. "I just paid," she said. The dragon's chest rose with a deeper breath than it had taken in years, a faint glow returning to cracked scales, and somewhere in the galaxy, elder dragons felt a bond awaken that had not been touched since the first ages. The market fell completely silent, not because of fear, not because of threat, but because everyone present understood, too late, that 3 credits had just purchased something priceless, and the universe does not forgive those who mistake mercy for weakness. The silence did not break with screams or alarms. It fractured with fear, the kind that crawled under skin and told every living thing in the market that something ancient had just been disturbed. Mira didn't notice any of it at first. She was too busy holding the dragon's head in her lap, humming softly the way her mother used to hum when nights were cold and food was scarce, unaware that traders around her were backing away, dropping wares, and disabling holocams as if that could somehow make them invisible to whatever was coming. The dragon's breathing grew steadier, each inhale pulling heat from somewhere deep and forgotten, and with every exhale the faintest embers leaked from between cracked scales. The suppression collar sparked violently, systems fighting a bond they were never designed to restrain, and then, without explosion, without drama, it went dark. The Grull merchant stumbled backward. "That collar is military grade," he hissed. Nothing disables it without authorization. Mira looked up at him, brow furrowed. I authorized it, she said simply. I paid. The words shouldn't have meant anything. They did. The dragon shifted, pain rippling through its massive body, and Mira slid back instinctively, hands raised not in fear but to give space. Easy, she whispered. You're safe now. Safe. The dragon had not heard that word directed at him since before his name had been burned out of history. His eye focused fully for the first time in decades, ancient intelligence sharpening as it looked not at weapons or exits but at the child. Why? The question echoed in his mind, not spoken aloud. Not yet. Mira answered anyway. Because no one should die in a cage, she said, as if responding to a simple riddle. Across the market, a warning siren finally wailed. Too late, far too late. Security drones lifted into the air, weapons humming, targeting systems locking onto the dragon's heat signature, but none fired. Their systems froze, flooded by an identification code that hadn't existed in any database for centuries. Elder-class draconic sovereign status. Alive. Traders stared at the floating glyphs in disbelief. Some fell to their knees. Others ran. The dragon slowly pushed himself upright, broken wing dragging uselessly, tail scraping metal, but even wounded he dwarfed everything around him. Heat rolled outward in controlled waves, not burning, not threatening, restrained with deliberate care. Mira stood too, placing herself directly in front of him without realizing what she was doing. A security officer shouted, voice cracking, "Child, move away from the creature." Mira shook her head. He's not a creature, she said. He's just hurt. The dragon lowered his massive head until one eye was level with her, close enough that anyone watching was certain they were about to witness a massacre. Instead, he spoke, voice rough and low, like mountains grinding together. Little human, he said slowly, each word rediscovered after centuries of silence. You spent the last of your wealth on a dying enemy. Why? The market held its breath. Mira thought for a moment, then shrugged. You didn't look like my enemy, she replied. You looked lonely. That was when the entire market truly went silent. Not because of fear, but because something fundamental had broken. Dragons were supposed to respond to strength, to dominance, to challenge. This one closed his eye for a long, trembling second, and when he opened it again, molten light traced patterns along his scars. I am Veilthrix, he said, name resonating through stone and bone alike. Last flame of the Ash Concord, devourer of armies. Mira smiled a little. I'm Mira, she said. I don't have a last name. Veilthrix lowered his head further, carefully, reverently, until his forehead touched the ground before her. The impact cracked stone. Every being in the market understood what that meant. Dragons did not bow. Not to kings. Not to gods. Security weapons powered down one by one as command channels flooded with emergency transmissions. Do not engage. Repeat. Do not engage. High above the market dome, the sky darkened. Not with storm clouds, but with shadows of wings so vast they blotted out artificial sunlight. Elder dragons were coming. Traders screamed now, not in anger, but in terror as ancient shapes circled the city, their presence bending gravity and temperature alike. Veilthrix spoke again, voice steady, controlled, and infinitely dangerous. This child is under my protection, he declared. Harm her, and your world will learn why dragons were feared. Mira tugged gently on one of his cracked scales. No threats, she whispered. You're supposed to get better. Veilthrix paused, then gave a sound that shook the market. Not a roar, but a laugh, deep and astonished. As you command, he said softly. When the first elder dragon descended onto the outskirts of the city, collapsing buildings without touching them, markets across the planet shut down instantly. Councils panicked. Militaries froze. And in the center of it all stood a human girl with empty pockets and steady hands, who had unknowingly rewritten a law older than empires. That mercy, once accepted by a dragon, becomes sacred. Veilthrix carefully wrapped his remaining wing around Mira, shielding her from the rising heat and fear. And for the first time since the Ash Concord fell, a dragon did not feel alone. The galaxy watched in stunned silence as history pivoted. Not on war, not on power, but on 3 credits and a child who refused to let a dying legend die unloved. The arrival of the Elder Dragons did not bring destruction. It brought judgment, the kind that does not need fire to be felt. One by one, they descended around the market district, colossal forms folding wings with ritual precision, claws carving deep scars into stone they treated like sacred ground. Entire buildings bowed under the pressure of their presence, and every living being understood instinctively that this was not an invasion. It was a tribunal. Veilthrix remained still, his body angled protectively around Mira. His head lowered not in submission to the elders, but in acknowledgement. The eldest among them, her scales white as bone and etched with glowing runes of age-old authority, fixed her gaze on the broken dragon and then on the small human child standing before him. Veilthrix of the Ash Concord, she spoke, voice echoing inside minds rather than ears. We felt your awakening. We felt your bond. Explain. Veilthrix exhaled slowly, heat rippling outward but harming nothing. I was caged, broken, forgotten, he said. This child saw me and chose mercy. The Elder Dragon's gaze sharpened. Mercy does not bind dragons. Mira, unaware she was breaking every protocol in existence, raised her hand slightly. He didn't ask me to, she said. I just didn't want him to be alone. A murmur, ancient, draconic, almost like shock, passed through the elders. The bone-scaled dragon leaned closer, studying Mira as if she were a puzzle written in a language long lost. Little human, she said gently. Do you understand what you bought with your credits? Mira shook her head. No, she admitted. I just know he was hurting. The elder dragon straightened, wings spreading slightly. Then hear this, she declared, her voice carrying beyond the market, beyond the city. By ancient law, any being who gives uncoerced mercy to a dragon in despair becomes kin of flame. The words hit like thunder. Traders collapsed where they stood. Officials went pale. Kin of Flame was not a title. It was a covenant older than stars, one that dragons had honored even against their own kind. Veilthrix bowed his massive head again, this time fully, wings trembling. I accept, he said. The market was no longer a market. It had become holy ground. Security forces received orders to withdraw. Slavers were dragged away in restraints, some screaming, some silent with terror as elder dragon eyes followed them. The Gruul merchant who had sold Veilthrix tried to run. He made it 3 steps before the ground itself rose, stone locking around his limbs. The bone-scaled elder glanced at him once. This one trafficked what was sacred, she said coldly. He will repay the debt in labor until his lifespan ends. No one argued. Mira tugged gently at Veilthrix's scale again. Can we go somewhere quieter? She asked. Veilthrix blinked, then rumbled softly. Anywhere you wish, he replied. The elder dragons cleared a path, and for the first time in recorded history, a dragon followed a human child through a crowd. Not as a weapon, not as a god, but as a guardian. As they moved, citizens fell to their knees, not in worship of the dragon, but in recognition of what the child had done. News feeds across the galaxy exploded. Human child claims dragon. Elder dragons return. Market silent after 3 credits. Governments argued. Militaries recalculated. Philosophers panicked. Because if a child with nothing could change a dragon's fate, then the galaxy's rules were not as fixed as everyone pretended. They reached the edge of the city where the noise faded, and Veilthrix finally allowed himself to rest, lowering his body carefully onto reinforced stone. Mira sat beside his head, exhaustion finally catching up to her, and without thinking, she leaned against his warm scales. Veilthrix felt something unfamiliar tighten in his chest. Not pain, not rage, but purpose. Little kin of flame, he said quietly. Do you know what comes next? Mira yawned. You heal, she murmured. Then, Maybe we find you a place to sleep where no one hurts you. Veilthrix looked to the elder dragons watching from a distance, their expressions unreadable, and then back to the child who had rewritten his fate. Then, he said, voice steady with ancient promise, this galaxy will have to learn how to live with the consequences of kindness. High above, the elders began to circle, not in threat, but in protection, because something fragile and dangerous had been born that day, a future where dragons remembered mercy and chose to answer it. The consequences arrived not as fire from the sky, but as questions no empire was prepared to answer, and Mira slept through most of them with her head resting against Veilthrix's chest, soot-smudged cheek rising and falling with the steady thunder of a dragon's heart. By the time she woke, the city had changed. Streets around the market were sealed, not by force but by reverence, marked as neutral ground where no weapon systems functioned and no authority dared issue commands without elder dragon consent. Veilthrix's wounds were being treated by dragon healers flown in from across the spiral arm, their movements careful, almost tender, as they repaired wing membranes and purged toxins that had been designed to kill legends quietly. Mira watched it all with sleepy curiosity, offering pieces of bread to anyone who looked tired, including dragons who accepted them solemnly because refusing a kin of flame was unthinkable. News drones hovered at a respectful distance, broadcasting images that shattered centuries of propaganda. A dragon allowing small human hands to touch his scars, elders coiling protectively around a child who owned nothing but kindness, slavers being marched away not by soldiers, but by the weight of ancient law. Councils demanded explanations. Militaries demanded contingency plans. The elders answered none. By the seventh day, the galaxy stopped asking what happened and started asking what happens now, and that question terrified empires more than any dragon ever had. Mira sat on a warm stone terrace overlooking the city, swinging her legs while Veilthrix lay beside her, no longer broken, no longer caged, but still careful, as if afraid that one careless movement might shatter the fragile world this child had built around him. His wing had healed enough to fold properly, scars now glowing faintly with elder runes etched by dragon healers, marks that declared him protected under ancient covenant. Above them, the elder dragons formed a slow, endless circle, a living constellation that broadcast a single unmistakable message across every channel and species. The age of silent suffering was over. Delegations arrived in waves. Envoys in polished armor, scholars with trembling hands, generals who had spent lifetimes planning how to kill beings like Veilthrix, only to find themselves unable to speak when faced with a human girl offering them bread and asking if they were hungry. Treaties stalled because no one could threaten a child without becoming a monster in the eyes of the entire galaxy. Trade routes shifted. Markets closed. Slaver networks collapsed overnight as dragons began appearing unannounced, not breathing fire, merely watching, and that was enough. Mira did not understand any of this. She only noticed that fewer people were sad, and that Veilthrix smiled more, a terrifying sight to everyone except her. On the 10th night, as twin moons rose, the eldest dragon, the bone-scaled matriarch, descended quietly beside Mira. "Kin of flame," she said, voice gentle but heavy with time. "Your kindness has bound many fates. Dragons will remember this debt forever." Mira tilted her head. "I don't want a debt," she said. "I just wanted him to live." The matriarch studied her for a long moment, then nodded. "Then you have done something rarer than binding a dragon," she replied. "You have reminded us why we once protected the stars." Veilthrix lowered his head beside Mira, eyes reflecting firelight and something softer. "What will you do now?" he asked the child. Mira thought hard, brow furrowed. "Maybe help the others," she said finally. "The ones still in cages." The words spread like a spark in dry air. Elder dragons lifted their heads. Healers paused. Envoys went pale. Veilthrix felt pride swell in his chest. Not the pride of conquest, but of purpose. "Then," he said, voice carrying across the terrace, "I will walk with you." The first rescue happened before dawn. A slaver outpost on the edge of civilized space woke to shadows blotting out stars and realized too late that secrecy meant nothing to beings older than fear. Dragons did not burn the facility. They landed. They opened cages. They waited. Mira walked among the freed creatures. Alien, beast, broken, forgotten. Holding hands, offering food, speaking softly, while Veilthrix stood watch like a living mountain. News feeds struggled to name what they were witnessing. Liberation? Judgment? Myth reborn? None of the words fit, because at the center of it all was not a weapon, not a prophecy, but a child who had spent 3 credits and refused to look away. Within weeks, entire systems declared slaving a crime punishable by dragon intervention, a sentence no one dared test. Dragons, once symbols of terror, became symbols of memory, reminders of what happened when suffering was ignored too long. Some feared them still. Many did, but fear no longer stood alone. It had been joined by something far more dangerous to tyranny: hope. Years later, historians would argue endlessly about when the balance of the galaxy truly shifted, when empires began to crack, when old laws failed, when dragons returned to the skies not as destroyers but as watchers. Most would point to treaties or interventions or the fall of entire markets. They would be wrong. It began in a forgotten stall, with a dying dragon, a rusted cage, and a human girl who thought 3 credits was enough to save a life. Mira grew, as humans do, taller and stronger, but she never outgrew the habit of sitting beside Veilthrix's head and telling him about her day. He listened, as dragons do, guarding not just her body but the fragile idea she carried, that no being was beyond mercy. When she finally asked him, years later, if he regretted surviving, Veilthrix answered without hesitation. "No," he said, "because you taught me that the greatest fire is not the one that destroys worlds, but the one that warms them." And so the galaxy learned, slowly and painfully, that sometimes the most terrifying silence is not the pause before destruction, but the moment when everyone realizes that kindness has teeth, memory has wings, and dragons never forget who saved them.